Hi, this is Helen Thomas from the CDFM study group. All right, so I figured out another way to present the information from the 2018 study guide in CDFM module 1.1, the government resource management environment. So I just kind of pulled out some information and put it in a PowerPoint as a different way to present the information. All right, so let's begin. So remember that the Articles of Confederation is the precursor. That's a document that came before the Constitution. The Constitution is the base document that is used to develop our resource management and budget process. And in the Constitution, the principle of separation of power was invested. And so it resulted in three branches of government: the legislative, executive, and judicial branch. Why is that important? Well, because the budget comes and has to go through each one of these areas, and it's important for us to understand what happens. What's their responsibility? What are they allowed to do in each one of those branches of government? So learn them in this order. Legislative is the same thing as Congress. Executive is the same thing as the president. And judicial branch is the same thing as your courts. So Article 1 of the Constitution, if you learn it in that order, governs what the legislative branch is allowed to do, aka Congress. So the legislative branch makes the laws. So Congress is the lawmaking powers, includes they're allowed to raise funds, borrow money, regulate okay, I'm sorry, but I don't like how that looked. So let me see. Let me fix that. And you watch me as I work. I'm a partial perfectionist. All right, so Congress lawmaking powers include it can raise and borrow money, regulate commerce, declare war, raise and support armies under Article 1 of the Constitution. Article 2 right here governs the executive branch, the president. Give the powers of the president to execute the laws. The president is the commander-in-chief and maintains executive powers. And Article 3 governs the judicial branch with the powers of the courts to interpret the laws. So you have your Supreme Court, inferior courts as established by Congress. How do we propose legislation? So we being Congress, because we said Congress makes laws. So how to propose legislation? You have bills. So your bills are your general legislative proposal. If it comes from the House, it begins with an H, or House of Representatives. And if it's the Senate originates the bill, it starts with an S. Makes it easy, right? Joint resolutions. The House joint resolution is prefixed, so it just tells you how they label. If it's a joint resolution, it's labeled. So joint meaning it's got to come from both sides, affecting in the same manner as bills. So the joint resolution and the bill. So typically, if they want to make a change in the Constitution, they have to use a joint resolution because it's specific, whereas a general bill is what's used for everything else. So joint resolution used to consider, here you go, proposed, I shouldn't jump the gun, changes to the Constitution. Ratification, if you want to change the Constitution, it requires 3/4 of the states to agree. Proposed amendments are not sent to the president for approval. So that means if a law or something in the Constitution needs to be changed, if 3/4 of Congress can agree, it doesn't even have to go to the president for the president to sign. So that's something interesting. Concurrent resolution is if it's a matter affecting both the House of Representatives and the Senate. So what's important with concurrent and simple resolution, let me go back because it doesn't say it. Neither the concurrent or the simple needs to go to the president. So let me clarify. The bill and the joint resolution under normal conditions go to the president for the president to sign for them to become law. Concurrent and simple resolution do not go to the president. However, remember this exception to policy here. In the joint resolution process, if 3/4 of the states agree with the change, then this one does not have to go to the president either for approval. So that's when you study is what you're looking for, those things that are different. So who can originate a legislation? I think there were 3 that we discussed earlier. It's either can be recommended by the president, and you wonder what's the hoopla about the State of the Union, because the State of the Union is the president's ability to let the nation, let the country, let Congress know what his priority in the near future is going to be, what things he's going to be recommending for consideration, what he wants to do. So the president can recommend legislation through the State of the Union address. It can either be introduced by members of Congress or a whole committee. So those are the only 3 ways in which a legislation could be originated. How does a bill become law? So we says either one of those 3 entities introduced it. So it's introduced by any member of Congress by placing it in the hopper. We want to send it forward for it to become law. So it's labeled and placed in the hopper. Then it's considered by a committee. So even though that law, now everyone else needs to look at it. Public hearings and markup. So the committee reviews it to get an understanding of what exactly this bill is all about. They mark it up, just like if you write an evaluation, you write an award, it goes through someone before it gets to the final approving authority so they can mark it up and send it back for your correction. So the committee take action, they vote. A vote is taken, and if approved, they may decide to submit a clean bill. So once it's marked up here and corrected, and they still agree, then they'll send it forward. The committee can take action and send forward a clean bill. We make the corrections and all the markup. Then it goes on the House floor and the Senate floor in identical form. Each side reviews the bill, and once the bill has been passed by one body, the House or the Senate, the bill is called an engrossed bill. So that's assuming that both sides agree on everything, then the engrossed bill is created. However, if they do not agree, before you can do the engrossed bill, they have to resolve their differences, because only one bill can go to the president in identical form, one bill to the president for the president to sign or consider or veto. So conference committee. So whenever the House of Representatives and the Senate needs to resolve differences, then they need to come together in a conference committee. Is where the representative of both sides come to discuss so they can vote and make a decision. So the conference committee is also known as the third chamber of Congress. And then once they resolve the differences in identical form, they can submit an engrossed bill. So the final step after the bill has been engrossed in identical form, it is submitted and enrolled to be sent to the president for approval or veto. Presidential action, he can approve and sign it. Does not sign but allows the bill to become law. So Congress is in session. The president does not sign within 10 days. That bill automatically becomes law. Pocket veto. Congress is adjourned. and the president fails to sign within the 10 days, this bill on a pocket veto does not automatically become law. And then a traditional veto is when the president does not sign and returns the entire bill to that house in which it originated. So remember in 1996, the Line Item Veto Act was granted to President Clinton. So eventually it was declared unconstitutional because what it did, it allowed the president to line through anything he didn't like in the bill, and then he signed the bill into law. Whereas now, if they disagree with any portion of the bill, they have to return the entire thing. So that's the presidential action. So what does Congress do in this process after the president signs it? So then you have their budget process begins with budget formulation. We talk about issue guidance in the OMB circular. Organization develops their draft. They submit their estimates to Office of Management and Budget during the fall review. And once OMB makes their decision on what they're going to send forward to the president, they do an OMB pass back. President must submit their budget request to Congress no later than the first Monday in February prior to the fiscal year that begins 1 October. So congressional actions, there's 3 phases of congressional actions once the budget is submitted. So we're switching gears. You talk about regular bills, and then now you're talking about the budget process. So Congress conducts budget briefing, passes concurrent budget resolutions, authorizing legislation and appropriations. All bills must be passed again in identical form. So the first phase of congressional action is the budget resolution process. This is handled by the House and Senate Budget Committee. That should be easy to remember. So they review the total outlay. How much did we spend out of our revenue, out of the Treasury? What's our total budget authority? What's our deficit? What's our expenses? All of those things are compiled by the Congressional Budget Office. They have their own budget office at Congress. The Congressional Budget Resolution, this process must be completed no later than April the 15th. The second phase of congressional action is the authorization process. This process authorizes the programs, the categories, and is handled by the House and Senate Armed Services Committee. This does not provide the appropriation, nor does it give you budget authority to spend any money. All the authorization process does, or the authorization law, is it authorizes programs. The third phase is the appropriation process. The House and Senate Appropriations Committee is one that approves the funding or budget. And in those appropriations, there are 12 subcommittees, 12 appropriation bills that must be approved. The 3 specific appropriation bills that the DoD is impacted by is defense, military construction, veterans affairs, and energy and water development. So agencies may revise their original estimates, because remember, your estimates are submitted about 18 to 24 months before it actually goes to Congress. So you may have to revise those estimates. And then come September, if Congress does not have a budget by 1 October, then they issue a continuing resolution. That is that stopgap temporary appropriation. Remember, Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution says that no money can be drawn out of the Treasury unless you have an appropriation law. So that law is the reason why the government shuts down if there's no budget in place, appropriation law, or if you do not have this stopgap, funding gap, continuing resolution, the government will shut down. So in budget execution, so now the Appropriation Act begins the budget execution process. That's when you get the budget authority to start spending based on purpose, time, and amount. So two things happen after the Appropriation Act has been approved. So once Congress approves the appropriation, two things happen. The first thing, OMB negotiates the apportionment. Anytime you see the word apportionment, you need to link it directly with OMB because only Office of Management and Budget conducts the apportionment process. This is done via a SF-132 where the agencies request their apportionment within 10 days of the appropriation law. OMB will then have 30 days to act on that apportionment request. So these funds are subject to Anti-Deficiency Act, ADA violation. The second thing that happens after Congress appropriates the money is the Treasury issues an appropriation or Treasury warrant. That's the notification to say your bank account's been set up, we've received the law and the guidance. So issuance of the appropriation warrant is the first legal action because it is tied to Article 1, Section 9 of Constitution. Article 1 tells you it's talking to Congress. And Section 9 says no money can be drawn from the Treasury. So in part of budget execution, Impoundment Control Act prohibits the president. They cannot withhold funds without enough reason or approval from Congress. So you have deferrals where the president have to request postponement of funds. And if Congress does not notify the president within 45 days that he can hold the funds, then he has to release the funds within 45 days to release those funds back to what they were approved for. Rescission, we're requesting a cancellation of those funds, meaning Congress appropriates money for a particular purpose, we no longer need it, and so the president can request a rescission or cancellation. So funds may be withheld pending approval. That 45 days again, but it says if both House does not approve within the 45 days of continuous congressional session, the funds must be released and made available for original obligation. This means you cannot cancel the funds and use them for something else. So let's see. I think I misspoke up here. So the deferral, if Congress does not notify President within 45 days to release, the funds may be deferred. Okay, so this one, the deferral says if they don't reply within 45 days, that's my yes to go ahead and defer. Rescission says if they do not reply within 45 days, I cannot cancel. I have to release the funds to do what they said to do with it. So remember, Congress appropriates, OMB apportions on the SF-132, DOD issues allotments to Army, Navy, Air Force, the services. Then we commit, obligate, and outlay. Outlay is when the funds have been removed from the Treasury to pay whatever bill. That process is called an outlay. Additionally, some terms you need to be familiar with: budget authority, amount of money available to spend. Commitment is administrative reservation. I just set the money aside and I've committed it to do a particular mission. Obligation, now I've obligated those funds. So I'm legally bound. I've legally bound the government to pay those bills. And outlay, funds have been dispersed from the Treasury. So that's budget execution in a nutshell. So that in short is module 1.1. I think that's the last slide, is it? So congressional oversight is also saying that once Congress gives us the money, it's dispersed, then Congress has oversight through the use of the Government Accountability Office, the GAO. And the GAO is an independent auditing agency that works directly for Congress. The person in charge of the GAO is the Comptroller General, the CG. So the federal budget, revenue, 50% of how the government makes money is through individual income tax, and 34% Social Security. Then you have some other categories. So the two primary methods of raising money is to raise your income tax or Social Security that they take out of your paycheck. Expenses, bills that we pay. So 70% is direct. That means those are bills that you have to pay. I got to pay my rent. I got to pay my civilian pay, mandatory payment. 70% of what I'm spending is mandatory. So only 30% of the money that I take in, I have to do everything else, to include defense, education, State Department, all those other agencies. So direct bills, the breakdown is here for Social Security, Medicare, and so forth. Discretionary, and look at, you see why they're always trying to cut the DOD? Because DOD takes up more than half of this discretionary spending. So 16% defense, so that's 30, yeah, that's 30%. And 14% goes to everybody else. So everybody else gets this little piece right here of the total spending. All right, so this concludes CDFM Module 1. Again, another explanation in short.